So we have the time. It would be great if we got everybody, Dave Jacobs and David Killalay, if you guys all come up this way, all the panelists. Michael's gone, I think. Who else is here? Mark is probably here still. If Mark is here, and so this, there he is. And Matthew, if you guys just come up here, and we'll take questions from anybody to anybody. There's been a lot of stuff that's been said, and come on up. So just about, so my response to you guys, because I'm an organizer, I guess, and it feels like we're an airplane and we're going down the runway and we're trying to get some lift, and so I look at sort of the intensity and the craft and the energy that Sherry has, and what Dave has, and then and talent and seriousness and youthful. Josey, it's great to get emails from Josey because it's, hey, it's just they jump off the page, and this last email had a picture of a windmill. The wildest structure I've ever seen is this huge. Have you seen it? So it's up in Humboldt, and it's this huge windmill mill, and it's 2 stories high, and it's all timbered up, and it's amazing. And it's sort of like, oh, there's some people out there with some energy, some good youthful energy, and it makes it all come up. It makes it. Yeah. We're percolating, and so anyway, I thank you guys. I thank you guys from who came in from the science. So anyway, throughout the day, there's been a lot of conversation. There's not been all that much questioning. We didn't have any questions coming after the farmers. Are there some questions out there? Because that's where we're. Why don't we start here? Because
for years, the price of wheat to the farmer was 3.5 to 5 cents a pound, and now we're seeing prices $2, $3, $5, even up to $10 a pound. How is that going to translate to the consumer?
I haven't seen wheat that expensive, but so what's happening, what we're trying to do is there are small guys here like John or, where we're paying more for small amounts, and it's costing a lot of money. They're not making any money on 3 acres. And but they're giving us something that's unique in developing those grains. At the same time, in this process, we're trying to create economies. So then we can get to someone who's larger, who has the equipment and has the ability to do 20 acres or 50 acres or 100 acres. And so we think that over time, if we stick it, we'll have we'll discover what people are willing to pay, what we'll have to charge. This is sort of an interesting system in that it's a non-commodity system, and it's very tough to be in that world. But anyway, that's what we're trying to do, and we're looking at the farmers. We'll have meetings with farmers. We're going to meet later on. It's sort of like, okay, well, what can you sell it to me for? And we're not going to them and choosing one guy in it's another. So I get it over there cheaper. We're trying to create a system where we lift all boats, and I think that's the goal on price.
Okay. Hi there. So I guess that, in a way, my question is about widening the circle of influence, because I'm a chef-type person, and I'm definitely and passionately interested in supporting the work of the farmers and the heritage grain movement. And though I haven't read that book, Grain Brain, I'm just wondering about thinking about reaching people that have the idea that that not only is gluten bad for you, but that grain's bad for you. I mean, my mom's not a food person, and she probably doesn't even know who Michael Pollan is, but she says to me she's in Massachusetts, and she's like, well, aren't carbs bad for you, and aren't grains bad for you? And I think that in terms of trying to do this work to be able to support the work of the farmers and get people excited and give people the tools to work with the ingredients, is anyone thinking about how to change that conversation? Anyone have any thoughts on that?
You have any thoughts, Mark? You? I mean, I think the answer is you need a scientific answer. Somebody has to stand up and say, well, this is what we know.
I think what you need is the evidence that the changes that are made, from my perspective, it looks like it may be in the processing. And that if you do the processing according to the way Joe does it, and you take that bread and you put it into people and you show that there are healthier outcomes, like short-term tests, challenge them with bread and look at how fast the glucose or insulin rises in their bloodstream about 1 or 2 hours after you give it, that would be evidence that it's better. And you can tack any other endpoints to that. You can look at other markers that clinicians are familiar with. And if you relate it to those types of endpoints, then the clinical community gets very interested very fast. So that's the way to do it.
Anyone else? David or?
I was just going to add that it needs to be, that step one is the science, step two is the communication of journalists. And there was a great Mother Earth, Mother Jones article recently that sort of took a few shots at the grain brain and actually presented some studies. It was a short version of the studies because it's too much to put in one article, but they put 3 or 4 studies that showed that whole grains are very healthy, and those kinds of articles, unfortunately, if your mother's anything like mine, it's a predominance of evidence phenomenon, and my mother sees that Dr. Oz talks about grains being bad for you, so she sees that a lot, she thinks that a lot. So if more and more articles come out, if some of the journalists here in this room write about it, and even if it's not directly on this meeting, and write about the positive benefits of grains, and then how if we can change the milling and change the way that we do things that the nutrition stays in, I think these kind of just knocking down that wall of perception is going to be the...
Yeah, I think science is one way, but I also think now, I mean, you're looking at a panel who... Does anyone bake anything that's gluten-free up there? Okay. Okay. I think the point is gluten. So within Whole Foods Market walls, gluten-free continues to grow at an incredibly rapid rate. At the same time, artisan, hearth, small local breads are continuing to grow, or actually growing faster, I would say, than gluten-free. And so I think part of it is maybe not trying to change that mindset. I think it's a matter of highlighting and talking about this story, because eventually that whether it's a fad or a phase, or eventually people are going to come on over and kind of check out what this group is doing. So I think you could try to convince that community through information and through science. I think to some degree it's a tough sell, and eventually that dies down a little bit as long as we're highlighting what's being done really, really well out there.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I was just going to say that, we're the ones that are out there. I mean, we're taking all of your research and the work that you guys do as well, and we're developing the product and we're putting it out there. And, I made a conscious choice that my primary source of getting my product out there was going to be the farmers market, because I was able to really be there. People were coming specifically just to get bread in at my stand, and I could talk to them about it. And there were definitely a few people that I talked to who said, well, I can't eat bread. And I was just like, just try this one. If it doesn't work, I'm happy to give you your money back. I guarantee my bread. And I wouldn't say all of them, but a good portion of them come back, basically stunned that they can eat bread again.
Did anyone die?
No one died, and no one has ever come back and asked for their money back. So I mean that's that to me is putting it in practice, and that's what we need to do. Like you said, highlight what we're doing, because there's so many of us, especially in this area, doing this kind of really good work and good bread, to kind of say that these whole grains have been good for us for thousands of years, and just because of the preponderance of some negative press that gets out there via Facebook and Twitter and all that we can overcome it based on the fact that we're doing excellent work. So.
No offense intended, but the nice thing about that press is they have very short memories, and fads can come and they can go really, really fast. Somebody has a microphone over there. That's Joe.
Hey, Bob. Oops, I'm tipping over the chair. I was still coasting back on the original question about the cost of and what whole grains are selling for, and the $2, $6, $10 a pound. And I remember being at an early meeting up in the North Coast, and someone bragged they were getting $12 a pound at the farmers market for their grain. And then we took 20 minutes or so to get to drag 3 or 4 bakers down out of the rafters of the barn after they heard that. And I think one of the real important things about this, and I'll say we're probably getting 4 or 5 times the commodity value, the mainstream commodity value for our wheat, but we're not getting 2, 6, 10. Maybe in some boutique markets, farmers market and stuff, but not selling to bakers. What's making this work is that we've eliminated 2 middlemen who are usually in the process. As the farmer, I am also filling the role of the grain elevator and the storage. I take on those responsibilities. So, and then I take my grain and I sell it to Rhonda, who has a mill in her bakery. So she is the miller and the baker. So, and I'm not trying to say anything bad about millers, but but it's a 2-person arrangement. We've eliminated at least 2 people who are usually in that system, and I think that's what's making it work for us. The model where we are, and we've got three bakeries in Humboldt County. All 3 of them have mills in the bakery, and that's what's making it work.
So, Elaine.
I'm wondering, for the home baker who's just getting started wanting to make bread with freshly milled flour, is there anything that person should know, anything that's a little bit different compared to working with grocery store flour that's maybe sat on the shelves for months and months and months?
Use more water, and because the bran and the germ, they soak up water that the white flour doesn't have in it, and it ferments faster.
Whole wheat commercial flour versus freshly milled whole wheat flour.
More water.
More water, and it ferments faster.
It's the same, yeah. I mean, it's definitely something that I get these questions a lot. People say I substituted this in the recipe and it was a miserable failure, and I said try again. Make one change. Like I said, one change every time you make a batch. This is the scientific method. It takes a long time to get something right, at least the way you want it to be. So I always joke that they hide all this information in books, that there are actually no real secrets to bread baking. It just takes practice, more practice, and then more practice. And a friend of mine who's a musician had an excellent thing. He said, practice makes practice. It never makes perfect. So you just, that's what you got to do. You just got to try something, and if you're, like I was, committed to trying to create a loaf of bread that I really wanted to eat, then, it took me a while, but I figured it out, and here I am, and here we are, so many years later, the collective experience that we have up here. So it just takes practice.
The faster fermentation was a real was a real obstacle for us in the bakery to when you're making 300 loaves of bread versus one, you have more flexibility with one, but keeping your eye on that bulk fermentation, because it's going to be a totally different beast than the commercially available whole wheat and the fresh milled will be a more subtle difference, but still tangible compared to the white flour. But
hi, thanks so much. It's really fun to see you guys all have like such eureka moments around baking. It's really amazing to see your emotional passion around it. And I guess the question I had is for people that are growing wheat, what are the wheats that you love? Are there varieties that you wish you could get and you can't get, or what is it that you want next?
I want more Sonora wheat.
I don't really have a favorite. I like what I took away from my sort of different wheat tasting experience is that I think there's probably always way more out there than I'm ever gonna taste. But I'm excited to hear that Steve liked the Nordic varieties and excited to see if any of those grow here.
What he said. I love Red Fife. That was the first one I fell in love with. But I have a new take on varieties. And this past season, I've been using a wheat called Hollis. And it was grown in two different fields, two different farms. And in the one farm, I've been making these gorgeous, fat, lovely loaves of bread. In the other farm, I've been making bricks. And so, to me, the variety doesn't matter if you're not getting the performance out of it. And so, one of the things that I wanted to come here and find out about was how can the farmers consistently grow this wheat. We found out that the wheat was harvested 2 weeks apart from each other, and that made all the world of difference in how it performed in the bakery. And so I'm just like re-examining what about varieties and thinking more about how can we help the farmers produce a consistent product that we can use and then give out to everybody to really dig. No, I don't believe so.
So,
I'll just add one thing to that. My favorite variety is one that really works. I feel kind of, it's a little cheesy saying this, but one that really works for the situation. I mean, one kind of variety is not gonna be good for everybody in every situation, in every locality, in every climate, and every. I mean, you look at the soil. In every location, the soil's got a different composition, and so varieties goes beyond. While it's relevant to flavor, it's gotta be functional, practical too. So.
Yeah. Can I say something too?
Oh no.
Yeah.
I everything I said.
I like what everybody said, and Chad said earlier too, and we can't taste enough wheat, so we generate up to 40,000 a year, and part of the problem is tasting all those. But I think the tastes are incredible. The variation, I agree with Chad, is incredible. One that we're really liking is Red Russian, which is a variety that was forgotten. It's from the 1880s. It's not a Russian wheat. It's a wheat that came up through California, but it's a beautiful flavor. When we do tasting, and we're talking up to 200 chefs and bakers, it wins every time. Another one is Vernon, which is French wheat, an organic French wheat that was grown in the 1980s, so 100 years later. It also has tremendous flavor, and it yields 10,000 pounds per acre in our location, certified organic. So again, what Jonathan said, we start with the farmer. The variation is spectacular from farm to farm, so your point we see all the time, right, of how it's handled. Post-harvest is as important as how it's grown, too. So and we're breeding a variety with Dan Barber. So it started out as Jones wheat, then it turned into Jones Barber wheat, now it's Barber wheat. So, But and we're working with other chefs and places to develop their own flavors. But anything you want as a chef or baker is there. If you work directly with breeders and people that are working with lines, you can get it. That goes from color to low volume to flavor to iron content. So the variation's there from a culinary point as well as a baking point.
So in a minute, so she's been very.
I have another question about home baking. Please, no one throw anything at me for this question. Two related questions. So you buy community grains flour or something like that. Is it unforgivable and terrible to use A, yeast instead of natural leavening, and B, a bread machine?
So some of my best friends are bakers who use commercial yeast. But it is, I think, personal, like if it's okay with you, it's okay with me. I don't know how you some people up there wouldn't want to do it. Do you have a response?
Well, okay. I mean, we're opening up we're going down the rabbit hole literally here. But the way I see it is, I don't think it's horrible to use commercial yeast. I would recommend in that case, if you're not going to be doing any kind of fermentation, that you at least soak the flour. I know Michael mentioned this earlier. That is going to do a lot of the phytate deactivation. That's at least going to start the process. That's the most important thing that you're trying to do. You're trying to make those minerals and nutrients available. And from a whole wheat, a yeasted whole wheat loaf of bread, you're just not going to get the kind of nutrition you could get. That's basically what it is. So yes, it's faster to do it with yeast, but if you're going to use yeast, I would recommend soaking. If it's whole grains, turning that into bread, or if it's like a whole milled flour and turning that into bread.
So there are all these issues about variety and whether it's landrace or whether it's modern or so there's a whole bunch of personal opinion, and it's personal choice, and so we think it's just a matter of transparency. It would be really evil to sell a commercial loaf of bread and say that it's made with wild yeast if you use commercial yeast, that would be really bad. And so you would want to say what it was, and then somebody would say, well, I don't want it because it has commercial yeast, and somebody would say it's fine with me. And then can we provide the honesty and the information to know what the relevance is so that they can make decisions for themselves. Same thing with organic versus conventional. I think that there is a, like we have preferences, I have preferences, you guys have preferences, you have preferences, but I think that we're living in a world that people should make up their own minds, and we really are starved for the honest information. And if you start with the transparency, then that leads people to be able to make, the right decision for themselves.
As to the bread machine question, though, that we kind of glossed that one over.
Yeah.
I personally would recommend that you at least, that you try to bake, and by kneading by hand. It actually doesn't take that long to do it. 10 minutes of good hand kneading is more than enough for a small batch of dough. But if I do know people that have baked sourdough breads using a bread machine, but you kind of have to use the machine not as it was intended. Mm-hmm. You have to do I've heard people turning it off, because bread machines are designed to bake yeasted bread, but you have to allow the bread time to rise, and a bread machine won't do that unless you make it work for you. So my answer is, yeah, if you can make it work, then and it's producing the bread that you want to eat, then there's nothing wrong with it.
So Fritz.
Yeah, I have a couple comments. One thing to think of wheat like wine grapes, right? You can get a Chardonnay from the Napa Valley versus the Central Valley versus the Central Coast. All different climates, different soils, and the same thing is with wheat. If we're just using the endosperm only, think of your wine as just drinking water. I mean, water's water. It doesn't matter where you get it from for the most part. Minor flavor differences. But this wheat now, we've taken it to another level. But the point I want to make now is I think some of these baking problems, if there's no integrity in what is whole grain, and somebody's using some 51% wheat, That's going to be very different than a real, true whole grain. It goes like extra virgin olive oil. Maybe what we have to ask for is come up with some standard and then hold people to that standard.
Who else? There's a question right here.
Yeah, hi, my name's Anina, and I'm thrilled to be here. I'm just a amateur baker from Carmel. But I have two questions. One is, what happened to rye in the store? Because that's the reason I started baking, is I wanted to simulate some of the good, hearty German rye breads. And you have to go to the specialty stores to buy rye flour, whereas I remember seeing it, in my local big grocery chain. And now I feel a little bummed because I feel like I've really been ripped off learning that the whole wheat flour that I've been baking my, what I considered my artisan whole grain loaf hasn't been 100% whole grain. So I'm here to speak for all of us who need to get on that bandwagon, just from the point of view of saying, you're not, I'm going to be one of those people hate to see coming. It's like, did you know that you're not eating that whole grain that you thought you were? Because that is enough push for us to start getting people to know what's in what they buy.
There's some rye bread that I baked right over there. 100% rye.
Monica, do you sell rye?
No, I'm not a grain seller. I've got a question.
Yeah.
It's not related to that. I've got a question for Stephen. Stephen, when you were speaking and you were mentioning that you were one of the few breeders that aren't putting genes in the wheat in their breeding process, so genetically modified wheat is out there and it is available? I was under the impression it wasn't. Did I misunderstand that? Okay.
The other is we don't do GM wheat. GM wheat is being done. It's not being commercially grown. So it's being grown in greenhouse.
Okay, it's being tested.
Anticipation for all of us getting re-educated.
Okay.
Mike, I want to tell you a little rye story. Maybe I can just talk without the mic.
Bob, you want this?
I want to tell you a little rye story with maybe a bit of rye humor. 3 years ago, I bought a cover crop seed with the romantic name of AGS 104. You're about to hear the story of my one concession to a proprietary grain. Well, this rye, as it grew, looked very nice. It was fall planted, of course. And as the first of our 3 drought years approached in the winter, I looked at it and I thought, we may not get the rest of our crops to produce this year. We maybe, instead of using this as a cover crop, we should harvest it. One of the reasons, in addition to that, was the fact that some of the stuff grew to be 7 or 8 feet tall. But we decided to hold it and harvest it. I thought, this is a gamble. It probably is going to taste awful because it's hybridized. It was sold as a cover crop rye. So as we harvested it, my farming partner John and I immediately noticed, as we do with all the grains when we're harvesting them, we chew a lot of it and eat a lot of grain while we're harvesting. And we loved the beauty of it, and we loved the taste of it. And it has turned out that every single baker, including Rhonda, who has used it, has loved it. We keep growing it. It has a very interesting heritage. I found a paper on it that describes the heritage of it, which includes an Abruzzi rye, as well as a variety from Brazil. It's one of the most popular things that we sell. I should actually be back home milling rye right now because the co-op is out. And yeah, we do sell it for more than $1 or $2 a pound in some cases, I want to tell you. So it's available and increasingly of interest to distillers as well as bakers. And it makes pretty darn fine rye crackers, thanks to Rhonda.
So we have them. Yes. So there's a question over here.
And then one there, and then here.
About 10 years ago, I visited a family-run miller in France, and what he told me was that they would blend their flours every year before distributing it to the bakers. You know, they will blend from the yields from the different years and also the different varieties. I'm wondering whether any of that is being done here as well.
Camas Country Mill in Eugene, Oregon is blending. So part of what we do is help millers decide how to put these blends together. Camas has a 3-week blend based on function.
It happens by accident in my bakery. As I finish one tub of flour, I'll have maybe 10 pounds or something, and I'll need to put it in with my next batch. And so, yeah, it happens by accident. But actually, they're kind of happy accidents sometimes, too.
Thanks. I'd like to go back to the discussion this morning by Mark Shiganawa on nutrition and gut health. The discussion of gut leakiness, I think, is really fascinating. And Mark, I think you made the comment that total fat intake was important in determining whether or not there was this increase in gut permeability, gut leakiness. But many of us love to take this delicious bread and dredge it in olive oil, and we eat this bread in the context of a diet that includes fats. So I just wondered if total fat is what's really driving this, or if we have healthy fats in our diet like olive oil, canola oil, omega-3, long-chain fatty acids. Does this enhance gut intactness? Question is about type of fat in gut health and gut leakiness.
The quality of fat definitely will play a role in gut integrity. Things like omega-3 fatty acids are known to metabolically enhance the ability of the cells to drive energy production, much more so than other types of fats. They metabolically program the cells to do that better than the other types. But then if you store fat and allow it to oxidize, those unsaturated fatty acids, which include fish oil, become detrimental and adverse to the gut. So that's the reason why we have our ability to smell things. So the rancidity of omega-3 fatty acids, which if fresh is good, turns bad if rancid. You can go down the rankings and show that the potency of these fats to induce these protective metabolic effects are not as strong. Saturated fats seem to be kind of neutral. Yeah.
I actually have two questions, but I wanted to go back to the comment about the combining of the different roles. Filling the role of basically the grain elevator, grain storage, and the farmer, and then filling the role of the miller and the baker. And I think the key is there. And it seems as though there's a lot of small solutions happening in localized areas. And the barrier to entry for a lot of the growers that might have the capacity to grow 1 to 10 acres is the resources and the infrastructure. And so I'm wondering if a part of this discussion that has been born out of community grains or elsewhere has addressed that yet and really gotten these different roles in the room and strategized about how to combine the jobs.
Yes.
Awesome.
It's sort of key to what we think we're trying to do is to take a very complicated all these issues about what varieties do we want, and under what conditions do we want those varieties, and trying to essentially create a cohesive, intelligent market, so that farmers will have some degree of confidence that if they grow X, it'll be sold, and at the same time develop this sort of common market, so that it's not just that baker can go to that farmer to buy some wheat. That works great in Humboldt. But if we want a larger environment, if we want to get grain to grocery stores and to all these bakers, and to give them real choice about wheat varieties, where they can have a sense of, I really want that, and have it available, and have a process where it can actually be offered to them, that takes a higher level of organization. So that is what we're trying to do.
Well, Janosek would love to be a part of that conversation, especially when it comes to sort of distribution and supply chain logistics, which I think are always obviously the roadblock to enabling smaller farmers to do this work. And my second question is whether this group is willing to kind of enter into the dilemma about feed and fodder. And Stephen mentioned it earlier, and I'm wondering from the production side whether there are some economies in growing foodstuffs alongside feed, because we have just as much demand in the small producer world looking for, if not certified organic, then at least source verified, GMO-free, responsibly treated feed. And it seems to me that these are parallel conversations that are moving slowly alongside each other. And I'm wondering if there is, and I'm not a wheat expert, and so I'm not sure, or a corn expert or a soy expert, so I'm not sure whether creating a ration mix alongside or interplanted with a crop that can be grown for foodstuffs is something that this group wants to explore also, because I think the need is just as high, if not greater.
Well, Stephen has an answer to that.
That's not really a question.
I could make one up. Don't worry about that.
And I'll try to stop talking after this one, but they go hand in hand. So if you look at the malting facility we have, and we did have a comment on from the miller taking 98% or whatever. For malting, they'll take about 60% of the best grains. The other 40 goes right into the feed channel. The top tier for us in Skagit Valley is bread and malt. Anything else has potential to go into the feed channel, including the crop itself prior to harvest. So if you have a thin-looking field, they'll go in and green chop it and go right together. So collaborating and coordinating with organic dairies and poultry is all that we're about right now. So it's a great comment and a huge part of a mature system.
I had a quick question. Maybe someone can answer. It's about the freshness of flour, and so it seems like we all agree that fresher is better as long as it's milled properly and retaining all of the nutritional integrity and flavors of the flour. But is there a point where things really start to drop off in terms of nutrition of the flour or the bread that can be made from the flour? Is it, some people say it's a matter of hours, other people say a year on the shelf is fine as long as it's milled properly. I don't know if there's been any science done on it.
Is Mark or David, would you have it's something, we've been sort of playing with these same kinds of questions, different variations of the same questions, and it's really, really tough to get answers out of it, and really, really tough.
I often hang out at Craig's Bakery, and one of the first things he demonstrated to me was he opened up these bins of flours that was using the dry mill processing, and what was really clear was that when you smelled the stuff, it smelled fresh. If you do the industrialized processing where you separate everything out and put it back together, there's this thought that the germ can't be put back because you would smell it if it was. So it all depends on the way you prepare it. I think if you prepare it properly, then it could last pretty long.
Pretty long in terms of weeks, months?
What I what I smelled or what I was not able to smell suggested to me that the stuff that he was opening up, who he claimed was over a year old, was probably fine to bake with. So.
I have a simple question about mothers and starters and just how important you think it is. I know you all love your mother because she's the only one. So I want to know, I just want to know. Well, the question is, what, from a scientific standpoint, how important is a starter being 50-50 whole grain, 50-50 rye, well, not rye, but something else, and how important it is to build a starter, and how much research is done on starters, and do you all just carry your starters around? I know Chad, I've read that he used to take it on vacation, now he doesn't. My husband's feeding mine, so just a question.
I did used to take it with me on vacation. I don't now, and I don't have the most like sentimental answer. I feel like you can start a starter in a few days, and it gets more reliable after a few weeks. But you know, I've been kind of using the same one for the 20 years or whatever. But it's definitely, there have been times when the whole starter goes into the bread. No one saves it. I don't keep a separate one, and it's not really an issue because the bread is just the starter at a different phase. So we just took it back, and it was like normal the next day. As far as what kind of flour, it definitely changes it depending on what you feed it. The natural microorganisms really want whole grain. They want the B vitamins. They want all that stuff. But yeah, I remember I only keep one starter, but when I worked for Dave, we had a couple of different ones, and they had really different flavors, different aromas, depending on what kind of flour you use.
Do you use half all-purpose white in your starter, or is it all natural?
It kind of changes too in the summertime when it's hot. I shift the ratios a little bit just to regulate it, because as Josey was saying, we all note that the whole grain stuff ferments a lot faster. There's just a lot more going on. So yes, something like half probably. But we also have a high extraction flour that we use, so it's not exact blending of white and whole wheat all the time.
I was going to say, I do something that I just sort of came to by necessity. I was keeping like 3 or 4 different starters, and it was kind of starting to get annoying. And so what I figured is that I actually the starter I keep from day to day, bake to bake, week to week, is actually a rye starter, 100% rye starter, a very coarse rye flour that I use. And then that starter I start to expand that for a batch, and then I divide that into 3 different starters: a whole wheat starter, a whole spelt starter, and then a whole rye starter. But the rye is the one that goes, lives. But I do agree with Chad in that case, is that you can start a starter. It takes minimal effort to make it. And, I have baked out my starter before, just like Chad did, and I just grab a piece of the rye dough and feed that, and there we go again. So it's really, once you have a nice established culture, I will say, people come to me and they say, my starter died. And I'm like, no, it probably didn't. You just have to keep, you just got to feed it fresh flour again and again, and it'll spring back to life. I took a long trip to go tour some bakeries in Europe, and I actually took Dave's advice. I dried it out, turned it like really crumbly, and I threw it in the freezer. And it survived 4 months in the freezer. I came back after 4 months, and I kept on feeding it, and I called Dave, and I said, Dave, I think it's gone. I'm going to start from scratch. He's like, no, just feed it again. Now, granted, my work feeding it probably was more work than it would have been to just start a new one. But I kind of wanted to try and bring it back to life. And it worked, though. It actually did. So and it did. It ended up tasting the same. And I had created a starter in Spain that I actually brought back. Didn't declare it on my customs form or anything, but I baked for that. I baked with that one for a while, actually the starter from Spain, and then I was concurrently had the starter I'd been baking out, for 12 years, and eventually just one day, kind of ceremoniously, I just baked off the Spanish starter, and just continued with my California one. So anyway,
I'll add the little sentimental underbelly comment. Because you mentioned mothers and caring. And I guess the only thing I can add is that is pretty much the key to success to a starter, is that it is teaching you how to care. It is something to care for. And that's the secret of success to really, in my opinion, through baking, is just, is how much you put into it, how much attention you give to it. So you're gonna, by having a starter, there's no real easy solution of, just kind of, you gotta put into it its due. What you put in, you'll hopefully get out.
One last question, anyone? Are we all?
For the bread lab, are you using the hammer mill? Is that been resolved as not an answer to what we're talking about here, or the hammer mill? Yeah, you have a hammer mill up there, right? Where does it fit into the idea of the perfect grain?
Steve?
We have 8 different types of mills, and if we fractionate, so if we stone mill, then we have a sifter that we can sift up to 7. We have if we're stone milling, for instance, we can sift out 7 different fractions. We can go in, and Jonathan may hammer mill one of those fractions and then put it back in, or do different things. So we don't hammer mill for baking routinely. It's more for experimental use. Hammer mill just turns it into baby powder, basically.
I heard one claim that it might combine the germ with the endosperm in a way that keeps them more intact.
Jonathan, you've baked straight hammer mill stuff. What do you think? So,
I found the hammer mill stuff stays fresh for a long time. We have a small hammer mill up in Burlington, Washington. It's that's all they do is just straight hammer mill.
Yeah,
and,
there's a commercial. So Fairhaven Organic Flour Mill is the large in quotes mill up in Washington. It started in 1976. Hippies under the co-op, basically, in the basement. And they have 2 hammer mills and a stone mill. And they do hammer mill commercially, so without tempering or anything. So dry, yeah, 100%. All Fairhaven does is 100% whole wheat. And 5 years ago they used 0 Washington flour. Today they use 100% Washington wheat. So.
And they're able with the hammer milling. I don't know much about hammer milling, but it's the nutrition, the flavor is all preserved.
It's kind of ongoing for us, so we don't hammer mill to bake, although we have done it. But basically, it takes that whole grain and just turns it into baby powder consistency. You can change screens on it and things, but it can heat up, and there are some issues in there. It's a super. Our spin's at 22,000 RPM, which is the same as a 777 engine. So it's like throwing wheat into a jet engine, literally. It pops. It just pulverizes. So part of Bethany's work is looking at all these different mills and the best use for them in terms of nutritional, functionality, flavor, all those things. So it's sort of ongoing stuff.